man's life that fades. She becomes a mirror, one that reflects to him what he needs to become in order to be worthy of her respect. There is a quiet power in a woman who does not offer her emotional sanctuary to anyone who knocks. Not because she is cold and not because she is indifferent, but because she has learned that her peace is a sacred place and not every visitor comes with clean hands or clear intentions. The boundary of emotional availability is not built from walls of bitterness. It is carved from the understanding that peace, once disturbed too often, becomes a battlefield, and love cannot thrive in chaos. In many relationships, a subtle pattern begins to form, especially for women who lead with compassion. She listens deeply. She nurtures instinctively. She offers comfort when he is frustrated and patience when he pulls away. But over time, something shifts. Her empathy turns into emotional labor. Her care becomes invisible. And instead of being met halfway, she starts to carry the entire emotional weight of the relationship. This often begins innocently. Perhaps he is going through something: family stress, work pressure, past trauma. She wants to be the safe space. But soon, she realizes she has become the emotional anchor, the therapist, the container. His growth halts. Her exhaustion begins. And the tragedy is this: the more emotionally available she becomes for him, the less emotionally present he becomes for her. Modern psychology has a name for this imbalance. It's called emotional caretaking, where one partner begins to take responsibility for the emotional well-being of the other. While this may look like love, it is more often a trauma response, a learned behavior from past relationships or early family dynamics. It's rooted in the silent belief: if I keep giving, he'll eventually see my worth. But the truth is, what is given too freely is seldom cherished. Neuroscience supports this with clarity. When one person in a relationship consistently overfunctions emotionally, the brain of the other begins to expect it. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, decreases when emotional reciprocity is lacking. Respect fades, desire wanes, and resentment takes root. There is a story of a woman named Layla. Strong, kind-hearted, wise. She met a man who had been through pain. He was charming, thoughtful at first. But soon, he began to pull away in moments of closeness. He wouldn't call for days, then return in a wave of vulnerability, pouring out his hurt. She listened. She stayed. She thought, if I'm patient enough, he will heal. The years passed. She was always available, always present. But her emotional presence became expected, not appreciated. And one day, she realized something piercing. I have given him every part of my softness, but I have received none of his stability. Emotional availability is not about being endlessly open. It's about being selectively receptive. It means that you hold space for others, fast only when they hold themselves accountable. It means you respond, but you do not rescue. You love, but you do not lose yourself in the process. To practice this boundary, start by paying attention to how you feel after emotional interactions. Do you feel nourished or depleted? Do you feel closer or more distant? Emotional connection should be reciprocal. It should fill both people, not drain one and comfort the other. There's a common myth that real love means showing up no matter what. But in reality, real love respects capacity. A man who values you will not ask you to be his therapist. He will not retreat into silence while expecting you to be his lighthouse. He will meet you in your strength, not just seek you out when he is in weakness. In Eastern philosophy, there is a teaching: even water that gives life must have banks to guide it. Emotional availability without boundary becomes emotional leakage. You begin to pour into situations that cannot hold you, and eventually you dry up. So when a man begins to treat your kindness as a given, when your listening ear becomes his default escape from self-reflection, ask yourself, Is this connection or is this caretaking? Is he present in his own emotional journey or is he using mine to avoid it? Emotional presence is a gift, but it must be given to those who are willing to sit with their own discomfort, not just offload it onto others. A woman with this boundary says, I will not carry what is not mine. I am here to walk beside you, but I will not drag you toward your healing. And in this clarity, something powerful happens. The men who are not ready for responsibility begin to fade, and those who are ready to rise start to show up differently because they sense something unshakable in her, an energy that says, I am a sanctuary, not a dumping ground. I am emotionally alive, but I am not emotionally available to dysfunction. A woman like this doesn't attract chaos. She attracts clarity. She doesn't become a placeholder. She becomes a partner, which leads us to a boundary that is often misunderstood but deeply transformative, the boundary of time and presence. What many do not realize is that as access to your presence, your time, your mind, your body, your energy, is one of the most valuable things you own. And yet, in the hunger to be loved or seen, so many women give it away too quickly, too easily, too often. But when presence becomes constant, it loses its power. When you're always available, you're no longer appreciated, you're expected. There's a beautiful quote that says, what is abundant is not cherished. Think of this like sunlight. We see it every day, so we take it for granted. But imagine if the sun only rose once a week. Its appearance would be sacred. We would wait for it. We would notice it. We would feel it. Psychological studies show that humans assign higher value to things that require effort to access. This is called the gas scarcity principle. It's not manipulation, it's biology. When something is always within reach, the mind subconsciously assumes it will always be there, so it stops paying attention. The dopamine of pursuit disappears. The reverence of connection fades. A woman who understands this does not withhold out of fear or strategy. She simply aligns her availability with her values. She knows her time is limited. Her attention is sacred. She does not offer herself in full to someone who is only half present. Think of a woman named Zora. She had a magnetic presence, thoughtful, warm, deeply intuitive. But every time a man texted, she replied within minutes. Every time he called, she cleared her schedule. And every time he cancelled plans, she made new ones for his convenience. Over time, the relationship lost polarity. He stopped pursuing. She became the one always initiating. The balance shifted. And eventually, he said, I feel like the spark is gone. What had happened was simple. Her total availability had eroded his respect. Not because he was unkind, but because he was human. Time is not just a clock ticking. It's energy. It's what you say yes to. Every yes to something misaligned is a no to your inner balance. So, how do you live this boundary? Start by observing your instincts. Do you respond instantly when he calls, even if you're tired? Do you abandon your own plans when he suddenly wants your time? Do you overextend to avoid seeming disinterested? Instead, learn to pause. That pause is not coldness, it is consciousness. It is the moment where you ask yourself, is this request aligned with my values? Does it honor my schedule? Does it honor my energy? In that pause, you teach others that your time is not a vending machine. They cannot press a button and receive you. They must arrive with presence, with intention, with respect. When you become more intentional with your availability, something beautiful happens. The men who were there only for convenience begin to fade. And those who value depth begin to pursue you with more clarity. They begin to plan, to call ahead, to wonder when they'll see you again. And that wondering is not manipulation. It is the fire of masculine energy awakening to a woman who is no longer constantly available, but consistently aligned. Presence should be sacred. It should feel earned, not in the sense of proving worth, but in the sense of shared values and mutual effort. A woman with this boundary becomes like a garden behind a gate. Not everyone is allowed to enter, but for those who are respectful, intentional, and willing to tend the soil, the beauty they encounter is unforgettable. And so, she does not chase. She does not fill the silence with reassurance. She does not sacrifice her own plans to accommodate a half-committed man. She becomes her own rhythm, and those who wish to join her must learn to move in harmony, not demand her tempo, but listen to it. Because when a woman reclaims the boundary of her emotional availability and the rhythm of her time, she sends a signal to the universe and to all who meet her. As I do not rush, I do not beg, I do not flood as I flow. As there is a hidden power in the way a woman allows herself to be spoken to. It is often overlooked. This quiet gate she keeps when it comes to words. But a woman who honors the sanctity of language will never permit her peace to be pierced by disrespect. She understands that words are not just sounds. They are vessels. They carry intent. They echo vibrations. And they shape the environment of the relationship long before actions do. Too often, in the name of tolerance or understanding, a woman will excuse the first sarcastic comment. She will brush off the subtle mockery disguised as a joke. She will sit through an argument that turns into a verbal storm, absorbing sharp tones and careless phrases, convincing herself that it's just part of communication. But language is never accidental. It is the surface of the subconscious. What is spoken, even in jest, carries energy. And over time, that energy either uplifts or erodes. There's a woman named Miriam, wise and centered. She once said, "The way a man speaks to me in conflict reveals whether he sees me as a partner or a punching bag for his pain." She had been in a long-term relationship where every disagreement into a verbal battlefield. It was never outright screaming. It was more subtle, passive-aggressive remarks, reminders of her flaws, questions posed as criticism. Are you really wearing that? Or maybe if you didn't overthink everything, we wouldn't be here. At first, she told herself he was just being honest. But honesty without kindness is cruelty, and communication without respect is corrosion. What Miriam realized is that every time she allowed that tone, that word, that phrase to pass without acknowledgement, she was teaching him how to speak to her. She had unknowingly set the standard of what was acceptable. And like water shaping stone, the constant drip of low-level disrespect had begun to wear away her self-esteem. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies show that in long-term relationships, it's not the grand gestures or even the absence of cheating that predicts longevity. It's the tone of communication. Researchers at the Gottman Institute refer to something called the Four Horsemen of relationship breakdown: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. All of these are forms of verbal and emotional misalignment. When a relationship becomes a place where words harm more than they heal, connection begins to die. And so the boundary must be clear, calm, and non-negotiable. I do not allow disrespectful speech in my presence. This doesn't mean overreacting to every word. It doesn't mean punishing or shaming. It means responding with calm clarity. It means naming the energy behind the words. When you speak to me like that, I feel disrespected. I will not continue this conversation in that tone. That is not drama. That is discipline. A woman who lives by this boundary teaches others that her peace is not a playground, that her ears are not trash bins for emotional immaturity, that her presence is too sacred to host the chaos of uncontrolled anger or unconscious speech. There is an Eastern proverb that says, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." In relationships, this translates to speak only if it strengthens the bond, not weakens it. When you hold this boundary, something powerful happens. The men who rely on dominance through speech begin to retreat. The ones who equate passion with shouting begin to quiet. And those who are capable of emotional maturity begin to rise. Because your presence demands it. You become the mirror that reflects their own inner voice and invites them to refine it. One woman, Elise, learned this lesson in the early months of dating a man she deeply admired. He was articulate, driven, emotionally open. But during one moment of tension, he raised his voice and interrupted her with a tone she had never heard before. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. It carried a coldness that made her body tighten. Instead of arguing back, she paused, looked him in the eye, and said with a still voice, "Please don't speak to me like that. If something is bothering you, we can talk, but not like this." Her calm startled him more than anger would have. It created a space for reflection, not reaction. He apologized. And from that day, their conversations shifted, not because she demanded perfection, but because she held a standard. Words are like seeds. They grow roots. They bloom into beliefs. And if you are not careful, you may begin to live in a garden planted by someone else's pain. Your verbal boundary is not just for him, it's for you. It keeps your nervous system regulated. It keeps your mind clear. It protects your sense of worth from being chipped away by careless language. Because love should never cost you yourself respect. And when that inner discipline is paired with emotional reciprocity, something profound begins to unfold. Because it's not enough to have boundaries around what is said to you. You must also have balance in how emotions are exchanged. Too often, relationships become lopsided because one person pours while the other receives. One person reflects while the other reacts. One initiates the deep conversations, checks in, gives reassurance, while the other simply accepts it, benefits from it, but does not offer it in return. This is where the fourth boundary must be embodied. I match effort, not emotion. This is the boundary of energetic integrity. It is the discipline of not giving emotionally simply because you feel deeply. It is the wisdom of responding to what is present, not what you wish was there. Many women fall into the trap of emotional over-functioning. They see a man struggling and they want to help. They sense distance and they want to close the gap. They feel tension and they want to resolve it quickly. But what often happens is that in her effort to maintain harmony, she begins to compensate for his emotional absence. She texts first, initiates check-ins, interprets his moods, smooths over his silence. And slowly, without realizing it, she becomes the emotional engine of the relationship. The problem is not her sensitivity. The problem is the imbalance. In neuroscience, this dynamic is linked to vast mirror neurons, cells in our brain that allow us to empathize and attune to others. When these are highly active, we become emotionally responsive, but without boundaries, we begin to merge with another's emotional state. We feel for them, but also begin to feel as them. This leads to emotional enmeshment, where one person's mood dictates the entire relationship. A woman named Soraya once reflected on this pattern after years of emotional burnout. Her partner was kind, but emotionally closed off. He never initiated deep conversations. He rarely expressed his inner world. But she compensated. She asked thoughtful questions, wrote love letters, created space for him to open up. And yet he rarely did. Eventually she realized, I was having a relationship with his potential, not with his presence. Emotional reciprocity does not mean equal expression at all times. People have different capacities, but it does mean mutual effort. It means that when one gives, the other notices and responds. That when one shares vulnerability, the other meets it, not avoids it. So how do you embody this boundary? It begins with observation. When you reach out, does he respond in kind? When you open up, does he lean in or change the subject? When you're upset, does he take time to understand or withdraw? Instead of over-explaining, esposi. Instead of pushing for connection, step backs. Let the relationship breathe. Let him come forward. Let him decide if he wants to match the energy or fade into the silence he creates. This is not about playing games. It's about emotional accountability. You cannot be the only one tracking the relationship. You cannot keep both your heart and his afloat. If he does not learn to meet you emotionally, then he will never truly respect your depth. Emotional energy is not infinite. Every time you give without receiving, you create imbalance. Over time, imbalance becomes resentment. Resentment becomes detachment. And detachment becomes silence. The beauty of this boundary is that it refines who is truly capable of relationship. It filters out the emotionally avoidant. It invites in the emotionally aware, and it strengthens your own center because you no longer base your value on how someone responds. You begin to honor your emotional effort by giving it only to those who reciprocate, not just receive. You say, through action, my emotional world is rich, but not free. If you want access, you must offer more than curiosity. You must offer care. This balance does not just protect your heart, it elevates your energy. Because a woman who matches effort, not emotion, no longer chases understanding from those unwilling to offer it. She no longer performs emotional labor for those who have not earned it. She becomes a sanctuary of emotional wisdom, not an emotional rescue team. And in that sanctuary, only those who are emotionally present, responsive, and willing to grow will remain. There is a quiet elegance in the woman who walks into a room and takes up space, not loudly, not dramatically, but with an undeniable presence that says, I know who I am, and I decide who gets to come close. That kind of woman does not rush. She does not explain herself unnecessarily. She does not give away pieces of herself simply because someone shows interest. She guards her physical and energetic space, not as a means to distance herself from love, but to protect the sacred nature of her presence. In a world that often celebrates exposure, speed, and accessibility, there is deep power in the slow, deliberate steps of a woman who treats her body and energy as something rare. This is not arrogance. This is reverence. And it is exactly this reverence that makes men pause, breathe deeper, and feel the weight of her presence before they dare to reach for it. The boundary of physical and energetic space begins with one simple truth. Your body is not a bargaining chip. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is not a tool for validation or approval. It is a temple, and not every soul should be permitted entrance. In relationships, physical intimacy often becomes a fast track to connection, or what appears to be connection. But connection built on premature access is rarely sustainable. The illusion of closeness created by touch fades quickly when there is no depth beneath it. And many women, taught to give too quickly in fear of losing interest, find themselves drained and confused when what felt intense turns into distance. There is a woman named Lila who once said, I used to think that being close meant being available, that the more I gave of my time, my touch, my presence, the more he'd stay. But I learned that giving access to my body before he'd earned access to my soul only made him value me less, not more. Lila's story is not uncommon. She was kind, nurturing, deeply affectionate, and when she fell in love, she gave all of herself, thinking that love was about total openness. But what she realized over time is that when you do not honor the sanctity of your own space, others will treat it casually. Energetic space is not just about physical distance. It's about the invisible field around you. The atmosphere you create with your thoughts, your presence, your posture, your silence. When you become highly attuned to your energy, you begin to sense who drains it, who disrupts it, and who aligns with it. And when you protect that energy, you no longer feel the need to perform or give. You simply become. Eastern philosophy teaches that the body holds memory, not just muscle memory, but emotional and energetic memory. When someone enters your physical space with chaotic or ungrounded energy, your nervous system reacts. Sometimes you feel drained after being touched by someone whose energy is unstable. Other times, your body contracts after a conversation that seemed harmless but left a residue of discomfort. This is your body's wisdom speaking to you, and to ignore it is to betray the very temple you were born to protect. One woman, Clara, began to practice this boundary after years of offering physical affection out of obligation. She had always believed that if a man desired her, she should respond. Otherwise, she would seem cold or disinterested. But each time she said yes when her body felt no, something inside her grew quieter. She began to feel disconnected, not just from him, but from herself. The turning point came during a silent retreat where for 7 days she did not speak, touch, or engage with anyone. In that stillness, she rediscovered the sanctity of her own energy. She remembered how it felt to sit with herself without needing to be desired or touched to feel worthy. And when she returned, something had changed. She moved more slowly. She spoke more deliberately, and men noticed. Not because she was more beautiful, but because her energy no longer reached outward. It called inward. This is the paradox of feminine power. When you stop reaching, others start arriving. And the ones who arrive are different. They do not come for what they can take. They come to witness, to understand, to align. In practical terms, this boundary shows up in simple, powerful ways. You don't rush into hugs or kisses just because a man initiates them. You don't sit close if his energy feels ungrounded. You don't stay in conversations that agitate your nervous system. You don't invite someone into your home if you haven't yet invited them into your trust. You don't explain why you're choosing solitude. You simply choose it. A woman who lives by this boundary will often be misunderstood. Some will call her distant. Others will label her intimidating. But the right man will see her clearly. He will recognize the value in her restraint. He will understand that she is not playing hard to get. She just is hard to get, not because she is withholding, but because she is whole. He will see that her body is not a transaction. It is a sacred expression, that her space is not a void to be filled, but a frequency to be respected. There's a beautiful Japanese concept called etasma, which refers to the space between things. In art, it's the pause that gives music its rhythm. In relationships, it is the silence that allows connection to deepen. The space between your words, the space between your bodies, the space between your availability and your boundary. When you honor that space, you allow tension to build, not as pressure, but as presence. And when a man experiences that with you, he begins to slow down. He becomes more intentional. He listens more carefully. He feels more deeply. Because in your restraint, he finds reverence. A woman named Aria shared once, "I used to think that letting a man in was about opening all the doors. Now I know it's about letting him wait on the threshold until his spirit feels safe to enter." She no longer rushed into intimacy. She no longer explained why she needed time. She simply stood in her stillness. And the man who loved her did not push. He waited. He asked. He honored her pace. Because the one who is ready for you will never require you to abandon yourself to love him. And so, your boundary is this, or my body, my energy, my rules. It is not up for debate. It is not shaped by the impatience of others. It is a silent agreement you make with your own soul, to be touched only by those who approach with clean hands and clear hearts. to be held only by those who carry presence, not just desire, to be seen, not consumed. This boundary makes your energy magnetic, not because you try to attract, but because you no longer try to be accessible. You no longer try to be understood by everyone. You simply exist in your own rhythm, and the world around you shifts. In the presence of a woman who honors her space, men rise. They slow their speech, they refine their approach, they bring more than charm, they bring character, because they sense something rare, something that cannot be rushed, cannot be persuaded, cannot be bought, only earned. Through presence, through patience, through purity of intent. And in that space, something sacred begins to grow. Not passion that burns fast and dies quickly, but connection that deepens slowly. Respect that becomes devotion. Love that does not invade, but is invited. There is a kind of silence that doesn't scream weakness, nor does it beg for attention. It doesn't retreat in fear or coil into resentment. This silence is deliberate. It is watchful, grounded, and immensely powerful. In a world that constantly demands a reaction, where quick responses, instant validation, and fast judgments are glorified, choosing silence can be the most defiant act of strength. This silence is not the absence of voice, but the presence of wisdom. It is the quiet refusal to be manipulated, provoked, or pulled into the chaos of someone else's dysfunction. In relationships, especially, it becomes the sacred boundary that protects one's emotional landscape from unnecessary contamination. It is a statement: I see what you're doing, and I choose not to participate. In the life of a woman who has matured emotionally and spiritually, silence is no longer a retreat, but a response. Not every conflict deserves a counterargument. Not every insult deserves an answer. Not every door that slams needs to be reopened just to say, "You hurt me." Sometimes the highest form of emotional intelligence is walking away with lips sealed but soul intact. Take the story of Lila, a 42-year-old woman who had been in a relationship for 6 years. Her partner had a sharp tongue and an even sharper ego. Every disagreement escalated into a verbal war. He needed to win. He needed the last word. He needed her to react so he could claim dominance. For years, Lila obliged, shouting back, defending herself, crying, justifying. The emotional toll was enormous, until one day, something shifted inside her. He launched into another one of his emotionally manipulative rants. But this time, she didn't respond. She simply looked at him, gathered her things, and walked into the other room. No anger, no tears, no words, just silence. And in that moment, the entire dynamic changed. He lost control not because she argued, but because she didn't. Her silence was not coldness. It was clarity. It wasn't punishment. It was protection. She realized that some people argue not because they want resolution, but because they want power. And when you don't give them that power, their words fall to the ground, impotent and ineffective. Silence in a relationship can be misunderstood. Some perceive it as passive aggression, others as avoidance. But when rooted in awareness and discernment, it becomes the highest form of self-regulation. It communicates. I don't need to convince you. I don't need to control you. I don't even need to correct you. I simply remove myself from this low vibration. A true strength often reveals itself in how little you react to chaos. In emotionally draining relationships, many people fall into the trap of over-explaining, over-apologizing, and over-extending themselves just to be seen, heard, and validated. But what if you realized that not every explanation deserves your breath? What if you internalized the truth that sometimes your silence echoes louder than any speech you could make? A woman's silence, when anchored in purpose, becomes the ultimate mirror. It reflects back to the other person the consequences of their behavior without a single word spoken. It allows them to sit in their discomfort, face their actions, and meet their own reflection. It interrupts the cycle of co-dependency and demands self-accountability. This is not easy. Silence requires discipline. It takes practice to withhold the urge to correct a lie, to resist the bait of a toxic argument, to stay calm when someone is pressing every button they can find just to watch you break. It takes courage to say nothing when your pride is screaming to speak. But consider this: you never have to raise your voice when your energy commands the room. You never have to explain your worth when your presence radiates self-respect. Silence is the language of those who no longer need external validation because they've built an inner foundation so stable, so grounded, that no amount of noise can shake it. The boundary of silence is also a line in the sand. It is where you say, "This is the space where I protect my peace." You may scream beyond it, provoke from outside of it, but I will not meet you there. And it is often this invisible wall that becomes the most powerful deterrent for people who thrive on your emotional availability. In matters of love, the power of silence is often misunderstood by those who believe love must always be loud. Constant reassurances, endless conversations, infinite availability. But real love, mature love, understands space. It honors the silence between two people not as absence, but as alignment. Not every pause is disconnection. Sometimes it is restoration. There was a time when Sophia, a therapist, found herself entangled in a romantic relationship that started beautifully, but slowly began to unravel due to emotional manipulation. Her partner knew how to charm, how to speak, how to justify. But beneath the surface, there was gaslighting, guilt, tripping, and subtle control. Each time Sophia tried to set boundaries with words, they were twisted. Logic didn't work. Explanations were used against her. She realized she was engaging in a debate with someone who wasn't seeking truth, only control. So she stopped speaking. She stopped responding to texts meant to provoke. She stopped answering calls that always ended in circular arguments. She didn't ghost. She withdrew with dignity. And in her silence, she reclaimed her voice. That's the paradox of silence. When used with intention, it doesn't mute you. It amplifies you. It doesn't erase you. It defines you. It's not a void. It's a vessel where your energy returns to you. People who rely on your reactions will be disarmed by your silence. They will call it cold. They will call it cruel. They may even say you've changed, but they will also know they can no longer manipulate you because you're not playing the same game. You've exited the arena without a fight and left them wrestling with their own echoes. Silence also teaches you how to listen, not just to others, but to yourself. When you stop reacting to external noise, you begin hearing your inner truth more clearly. You start recognizing what triggers you and why. You begin to discern between what is worth engaging and what is simply a distraction from your higher path. There's an old proverb: even a fish would stay out of trouble if it kept its mouth shut. While this may sound harsh, there's truth in it. Not every situation requires you to assert yourself. Sometimes wisdom lies in watching, waiting, and walking away in silence. In romantic relationships, especially during conflict, the instinct to defend ourselves can override our better judgment. But reacting emotionally to someone's immaturity is like trying to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it. Your silence, instead, becomes water. It calms. It deactivates. It ends the drama. But don't confuse this silence with suppression. Suppression breeds resentment. Strategic silence is different. It comes from clarity, not avoidance. It doesn't mean you bottle everything up and suffer in silence. It means you choose your battles. You speak when your voice will be honored, and you disengage when it won't. This kind of silence isn't about being voiceless. It's about being sovereign. And in a world that rewards reaction, your restraint becomes your revolution. People may ask, but if I stay silent, won't I be misunderstood? Possibly, but it is better to be misunderstood in silence than misused through constant explaining. The truth always rises, and those who genuinely care about you will seek to understand you beyond your words. Over time, you'll find that silence starts to reshape the very relationships you attract. You'll stop entertaining drama. You'll stop engaging with people who can't sit with your stillness. You'll stop feeling the need to prove your point and start aligning with people who get you without a paragraph. You start hearing the subtle things, the shift in tone, the hidden meanings, the silent withdrawal of respect, and you'll respond not with confrontation, but with detachment. And this is not bitterness. This is evolution. As one poet wrote, I no longer chase people. I learned that I'm here, I'm whole, and I'm worth showing up for. Silence teaches you that you don't have to beg to be seen, heard, or loved. You simply have to be present in your truth. Those meant for you will rise to meet you there. Even spiritually, silence is sacred. Every faith, every mystical tradition, every path of awakening honors silence as a gateway to divine understanding. You don't hear the whisper of wisdom in noise. You hear it in stillness. A woman once shared that after years of being in a verbally abusive relationship, she began a practice of spending 15 minutes in silence each morning before speaking to anyone. Over time, she became less reactive, more discerning, and deeply rooted in her own emotional rhythm. Her partner noticed. The dynamic shifted, not because she fought harder, but because she stopped fighting altogether. Her silence wasn't distance, it was depth. Silence, when rooted in strength, transforms everything. It becomes the pause between breaths, the space between thoughts, the moment between stimulus and response where your power lives. And once a woman discovers this sacred silence within her, she becomes unstoppable, not because she speaks louder, but because she knows when not to speak at all. When a woman learns to walk away not out of weakness, but out of understanding her worth, she becomes a force that cannot be manipulated. Her silence no longer represents submission. It radiates mastery. Her patience is not passivity, it is discernment. Every time she chooses peace over chaos, self-respect over desperation, distance over disrespect, she rewrites her own narrative, not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who has already chosen herself. She does not need to convince anyone to stay, to love, or to change. Her actions speak what words cannot. She gives without losing herself, loves without conditions, and walks away when she must, not to teach a lesson, but to honor her own soul. And in doing so, she becomes unforgettable, not because she chased, but because she chose stillness, clarity, and dignity in a world addicted to noise. In the end, it is not the loudest voice that commands the deepest respect, but the quiet strength of a woman who knows she is enough.